The night was too quiet, not peaceful, tense. The kind of silence that presses on your chest like a warning from heaven. Jerusalem's air felt thick, as if it already knew that something was coming. Something heavy. Inside a modest apartment, Miriam stood at the window with her fingers tightly wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. She wasn't drinking it. She hadn't taken a sip since the radio started buzzing 3 hours ago with alerts. Her son David, just 7 years old, was curled on the couch hugging his stuffed lion. The electricity had flickered twice, and he kept asking, "Mom, is it another drill?" But Miriam didn't answer this time, because it wasn't a drill. Her heart beat loud in her ears. The last time she heard the sky this quiet was just before the 2021 bombings, and tonight, it was too similar. She reached for the remote and turned the volume up, but the signal was gone, static. Then, a siren. Not loud at first, but rising like a scream from the soul of the city. Air raid. "David, now!" she shouted, pulling him from the couch with one arm and grabbing a backpack with the other. The hallway lights blinked, the neighbor's doors slammed open, panicked footsteps, children crying, radios crackling. The building shook slightly. No impact. Yet. But the ground was warning them. They made it to the stairwell. Miriam clutched David to her chest like he was part of her heartbeat. Down, floor after floor, her sandals slipping on concrete. And then the first blast, far but close enough to feel. The sky lit orange for a second through a crack in the exit door. As they reached the underground metro station turned bomb shelter, the silence was gone. Now, it was a roar, not just of bombs, but of fear, faith, and families packed into corners of concrete walls, whispering prayers in every language. Miriam looked at David. His stuffed lion was gone. She didn't even notice when he dropped it. The scream of the siren hadn't left her ears, not even now, deep underground. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, haunting, relentless, and real. The metro station had become a breathing organism of survival. Children whimpering, elders praying, soldiers pacing with tense jaws. Emergency lights cast everything in a pale yellow glow, like a ghost of sunlight. Miriam clung to David's tiny hand, her fingers trembling more than his. She couldn't find a place to sit. Not that it mattered. She couldn't sit. Her body wouldn't let her. Her soul was still upstairs, running through that stairwell, hearing the whimper of a city trying not to collapse. She looked around. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, and a few faces she didn't expect. One woman stood out. Not by volume, she didn't speak, but her eyes, dark, steady, and full of something Miriam couldn't name. She wore a scarf that hinted at her origin. Not local. Maybe even not supposed to be here. Layla. Miriam didn't know her name yet, only that she was kneeling beside a group of orphaned children, offering a slice of bread to each with the gentleness of someone who had already lost more than most. Their eyes met. For a moment, there was no war. Just two women, both clenching pain like glass in their fists, trying not to bleed. But Miriam quickly looked away. She shouldn't trust someone like her. Not with David beside her. Yet something inside her whispered, "What if she's the one?" And then, boom! The walls vibrated. Dust rained from the ceiling. Children screamed. One of the shelter lights flickered and died. Miriam dropped to her knees, pulling David into her arms. But he wasn't crying. He was staring, wide-eyed, across the station. "Mom," he said, voice small, "I saw the lion." Miriam blinked. The roar in her ears made it hard to hear, but she was sure David had said, "I saw the lion." "What, baby?" she whispered, brushing the dust from his cheeks. But he wasn't looking at her. He was standing now, too calm for a child in a bomb shelter, eyes fixed on the far end of the platform, where emergency shadows danced like ghosts. "I saw him, Mama," he said again. "The lion. He was glowing. And he looked at me." Miriam's throat clenched. "Sweetheart, that's just your imagination. Come here." But David pulled gently from her arms and stepped toward the back of the shelter. "No, no, no, David!" She rushed after him, but someone stepped between them, not in anger, in peace. A hand gently touched Miriam's shoulder. It was the woman in the scarf, the one with the quiet eyes, the one Miriam had been taught to fear. "I'll go," the woman said in soft, clear English. Her accent was Middle Eastern, but her voice, warm, stillness in a storm. "What are you talking about? That's my son. He's not in danger," the woman said, pointing. "He's going there." There. To the far edge of the platform, where the emergency corridor led deeper into the tunnel system, where it was dark, where no one should be walking alone. David was already past the crowd, stepping slowly as if he were following something only he could see. Miriam's heart snapped into panic. "David!" she screamed, pushing past people, knocking over a water jug, grabbing at jackets, reaching out. But he was gone. Gone into the dark. Gone into the fire. People turned. Others rose. The shelter was on edge now. Someone yelled about a new blast zone opening nearby. A soldier barked orders to stay down. The crowd buzzed, but Miriam didn't hear any of it. She dropped to her knees where her son had stood. Gone. Gone like her husband. Gone like her peace. Gone like her faith, which she hadn't spoken to in years. And then, a voice beside her. "I will help you find him." Miriam looked up, tears flooding her eyes. It was the woman again. She knelt down. And finally, Miriam asked what had burned in her throat since they met. "Who are you?" The woman smiled softly and answered, "I'm a mother, just like you." The underground station wasn't built for this. It was designed for trains, for tourists, for daily commuters trying to get through life. Not for war, and definitely not for hundreds of terrified souls packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the next explosion. Miriam stood motionless near the entry tunnel, where her son had vanished moments ago. Around her, the station pulsed with fear. People whispered, sobbed, shouted across the chaos. Yet in her world, there was silence. A loud, echoing silence of loss. She didn't move. Couldn't. But the other woman, the stranger, was already walking, moving calmly through the crowd like she had walked into war zones before. Maybe she had. She glanced back at Miriam. "Are you coming?" she asked. Miriam wanted to scream. No, she wanted to collapse. But instead, she stepped forward. The two women entered the darker section of the station, where flickering lights barely lit the concrete walls, and every echo sounded like a threat. They walked past huddled families, sleeping children, injured elders. People stared at them. No one followed. There was something sacred and dangerous about what they were doing. Finally, the woman spoke. "My name is Layla." Miriam didn't answer. "My family was in Tehran," Layla continued softly. "The last time the sirens came, I couldn't save them all." Miriam flinched at the word save. "I know what it's like," Layla whispered, "to search the ruins for someone who may not be there. But I believe he's still alive." Miriam's voice cracked through her clenched throat. "Why are you helping me?" Layla stopped walking. "Because this is not about nations, not about sides, not about who started what. It's about a mother and her child." They stood face to face, and then behind them, a cry. Not a scream, not a shout, a small voice, weak, familiar. "Mama?" Miriam spun around. From behind a pillar, barely lit by a broken ceiling lamp, David, dust-covered, pale, holding something in his hand. Miriam ran to him and dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "You're safe. You're okay. Oh my God, you're okay." David didn't speak. He was staring past her shoulder. "Mama," he said again. "The lion was here. He told me not to be afraid." Miriam's hands trembled as she ran them over David's face, his arms, his chest, checking if he was real. Not a vision, not a ghost. Her son. Alive. He didn't have a single wound, just dust on his skin and something in his eyes, like he'd seen more than a child ever should. She hugged him tighter, rocking back and forth, whispering, "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you." Layla stood a few feet away, quietly, watching, not interrupting, not moving, just present. Like a guardian that had walked out of the smoke, David looked past his mother's shoulder again. "That's her," he said softly. Miriam pulled back, confused. Who, sweetheart? David pointed at Layla. She was there too. I saw her near the lion. Miriam turned. Layla didn't react. She just smiled gently. You saw me? She asked. David nodded. You were glowing. You and the lion. Miriam's breath caught. Her logic tried to fight the words, but her heart surrendered. How could David describe Layla like that if he'd never met her before? How could he say she was glowing? The same words she herself had thought earlier when she first saw those quiet eyes. Suddenly, a noise echoed from above. The sharp rumble of another missile interception. Close. The ground shook slightly beneath their feet. People inside the station screamed again. Fear returned like a crashing wave. But not to Miriam, not this time. She looked at Layla again, and this time, she saw her. Not a stranger, not an enemy, not a symbol of the other side, just a mother, a woman of faith, a vessel. Thank you, Miriam whispered, tears in her voice. You helped save my son. Layla stepped closer. Maybe he was sent to help save you. And in that moment, amid war, noise, and brokenness, two women stood together, one from Israel, one from Iran, bound not by nationality, not by religion, but by a miracle that defied all logic. They held each other's gaze in silence. And something in the spiritual realm shifted. The shelter was louder now. Word had spread that another wave of missiles might hit at dawn. People were growing restless, hungry, thirsty. A few shouted at soldiers. Others cried silently in corners. In the chaos, Miriam sat with David curled in her lap, her arms wrapped around him like a human shield. Her heart was still racing, but for the first time since the sirens began, she wasn't panicking. Across from her, Layla rummaged through a weathered backpack and pulled out a metal water bottle. She uncapped it, wiped the edge with a cloth, and offered it forward. To the boy, she said. Miriam hesitated. Her hand moved, then stopped halfway. There were voices inside her. You don't know her. She's from the other side. What if it's not safe? What if this is how they get close? But another voice, quieter, cut through. She helped you find him. She walked into the dark with you. She could have run. She didn't. Miriam's fingers closed around the bottle. She brought it to David's lips. He drank, slowly. Then looked up at Layla and smiled. Thank you, he said. Layla smiled back, kneeling beside him. You're welcome, Habibi. Miriam looked at her again, not just with gratitude, but with something new. Curiosity, respect, maybe friendship? Why are you really here? She asked quietly. Layla didn't answer right away. She sat down beside Miriam, folded her scarf tighter around her shoulders, and exhaled deeply. My husband died in Tehran, trying to protect others from what our own government caused. Miriam's eyes widened. Layla continued. I escaped with my son, but we were separated on the border. I don't know if he made it. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. I help other people's children now, until I find mine. Miriam blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. What could she say to that? There were no more sides, no more labels, just two women in pain. And suddenly, without permission, without explanation, Miriam reached out and took Layla's hand. Two hands, two stories, two wounds, and somehow, they both felt lighter. The noise around them didn't stop. Children still cried, announcements still echoed, distant explosions still rumbled above the earth like giants waking in anger. But in that little circle, on that cold station floor, everything fell silent. Miriam and Layla sat hand in hand, their eyes closed. No one said a word. No one needed to. It was a prayer, not the kind with polished phrases or memorized verses, not the kind shouted in desperation or chanted in tradition. This was different. This was two souls groaning without language, two mothers bleeding without visible wounds, two women calling on the same God, maybe with different names, but the same hunger. Layla breathed in deeply, her chest rising like she was catching something in the air. Miriam had tears falling, but she wasn't sobbing. She looked still, broken, and at peace. It was David who broke the silence first. He was watching them now, kneeling beside his mother. He placed one small hand on each of their shoulders and whispered, "I feel him here." Neither woman opened her eyes, but both felt it too. Not heat, not wind, not anything you could measure or prove, but something settled. Like heaven had sat down beside them, like the war didn't matter, just for a moment. And somehow, that was enough. Across the shelter, people noticed the strange quiet around them, a stillness like the eye of the storm had entered the room. Even a soldier paused. Even a crying child went silent. And in that silence, something shifted. Then came a shout. A boy, no older than 12, running in from the far tunnel entrance. "They need help!" he yelled. "There are injured people near the south track. No medics!" Everyone looked up. Many looked away, but Layla stood immediately. So did Miriam. David looked at his mom, confused. "Where are you going?" She kissed his forehead and said, "Where the pain is." Layla looked at her, surprised. Miriam smiled through tired eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore." They walked side by side into the tunnel. Not soldiers, not doctors, just mothers who had already survived the worst. And now they were walking into someone else's fire. The tunnel felt colder the deeper they walked. The walls were cracked, lights flickered, each step echoed like a memory trying to return. Miriam and Layla moved carefully, helping each other through uneven ground, past fallen signs, old metal benches, and scattered pieces of someone else's fear. Up ahead, the boy who called for help knelt beside a wounded man. His father, maybe, trying to keep him awake. There were 3 others there too. One with a bandaged leg soaked in blood, one whispering a prayer in Arabic, one lying completely still, too still. Miriam froze. Her eyes weren't trained for this. She had never seen death before, not this close, not in a body still warm. But Layla knelt immediately, checked pulses, checked breath. Then she called out calm but strong, "We need pressure on his leg. This one's gone. That one's fading." Miriam dropped beside her without hesitation. She didn't think. She didn't panic. She acted. Tore a strip of her own shirt, pressed it against the bleeding leg, held the man's hand and whispered, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." Then, footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Boots. A soldier came running through the shadows. Young. Maybe 22. Sweat on his face, rifle on his shoulder. He paused as soon as he saw the women. And for a moment, just a split second, he aimed. It was instinct. The scarf, the location, the chaos. Then he saw the truth. 2 women saving lives. One Israeli. One Iranian. Together. He lowered the gun. "You," he stammered, breathless. "What are you doing here?" Miriam stood up. What no one else would. The soldier blinked. Something in his expression cracked. "My sister is stuck 2 stations down," he said. "I've been trying to get there for hours. I thought I'd lost her." Layla stepped forward. "You haven't. Not yet." The young man looked at them, saw the blood on their hands, the dirt on their clothes, the calm in their eyes, and something in him changed. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "I'm bringing a medic." And he ran back into the dark. Miriam turned to Layla. "You just saved a soldier's faith." Layla wiped her hands on her scarf. "No. We reminded him it still exists." The medic arrived in less than 10 minutes, thanks to the soldier. He carried a small kit, not nearly enough for all the wounds around them, but enough to stabilize 2 of the injured. Layla helped him, methodical and focused. Miriam held a flashlight while they worked, the beam trembling slightly in her hand, but her resolve never did. As the medic checked pulses and wrapped gauze, David came running down the tunnel with another soldier behind him. "Mama, they said it's safe for now, but only for a few hours." She bent down and pulled him into her arms again. For a moment, everything felt still, but as she stood, something caught her eye. A flash of blue in the far corner of the station. Familiar. Too familiar. She stepped away from David slowly, eyes locked on the object half buried under debris. A blue backpack. His backpack. The one he had lost during the first explosion. The one she saw him drop, but couldn't stop to pick up. Miriam rushed over and pulled it out from beneath the rubble. It was scuffed, dusty, but intact. She opened the zipper. Inside, a small notebook, a crumpled drawing, and something she hadn't seen before, a photo. It was hers. A picture of Miriam, her late husband, and David, taken 3 years earlier in a park in Tel Aviv. But that wasn't what made her knees weaken. It was what was written on the back, in a language that wasn't hers. Farsi. She turned to Layla slowly, heart pounding. "Did you put this in here?" Layla stepped forward, confused. "No, I've never seen that before." Miriam's hands trembled. She held up the photo. "Then who did?" Layla took the picture gently, read the Farsi writing aloud, translating as she spoke. "Your son is marked by the light. Do not be afraid of the fire. It's where the voice will speak." The room fell quiet. No one breathed. Even the injured watched in silence. David looked up at his mother. "That's what the lion said, Mama." Miriam's heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't scream. She wanted to. Everything inside her told her to. The writing. The photo, the lion, her son. It was too much. Too surreal, too divine, too impossible to be a coincidence. But instead of panic, she stood still. She didn't scream. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because something holier than fear had entered the room. Layla was still holding the photo. Her lips moved silently now, reading the Farsi message again and again like it was a sacred verse. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. "I've seen this handwriting before," she said at last. Miriam turned. "Where?" Layla's voice lowered to a whisper. "My husband used to write like this. Before the war changed him. Before they took him." Miriam stepped closer. "You think he—" "No," Layla said gently. "He's gone. But this was written by someone who knows the voice, who walks with fire and lives." David tugged at Miriam's sleeve. "Mama, I didn't tell you everything." She knelt beside him, her voice calm but urgent. "What is it, baby?" He hesitated. "When I followed the lion, he led me through the dark, but there was also a man. In the tunnel, I couldn't see his face. He had a deep voice and he said..." David looked into her eyes. "Tell your mother not to fear. Tell her I walked through the fire first." Miriam felt something break inside her. Not a breaking that destroys, a breaking that opens. Like a seal, like a door, like a heart. She held David close, not saying a word, just breathing in his warmth. Just believing. Across the shelter, things were shifting. People who had been arguing were now sitting in quiet groups. A soldier knelt beside a wounded child, offering him his own water. A rabbi and an imam, strangers just an hour ago, stood side by side, speaking softly to a small crowd. Something was stirring. Something had entered the fire. And in the middle of it all stood a woman who didn't scream. If you've ever walked through fire and held back the scream just long enough to hear God's whisper, you know this story is yours too. Share this moment. Someone needs it. And if you've made it this far, stay with us. Because the miracle hasn't finished yet. The medic had done all he could, but one of the men pulled from the south tunnel wasn't breathing anymore. He lay still on the cold concrete, his chest unmoving, lips pale, blood drying in the corners of his mouth. His son, the boy who had called for help, knelt beside him, hands shaking, eyes wide open but blank. The kind of stare only trauma creates. Everyone around had gone silent again, not out of respect, out of helplessness. Even the medic shook his head, softly. I'm sorry." The boy didn't speak. He just leaned forward and pressed his small head against his father's chest. Miriam watched, frozen, her arms instinctively wrapped around David again. Then, she noticed Layla moving. She walked slowly, not like she was rushing to save, but like she was answering a call. She knelt beside the boy, placed a hand on his back, and looked at the man. Her other hand hovered inches over his chest. She closed her eyes, and she whispered. Not in Hebrew, not in Farsi, not even in English. It was something ancient, something deep, a language not of tongues but of spirit. Miriam couldn't understand the words, but she could feel them, pulling at something invisible in the room. David leaned in and whispered, "She's praying with fire." Seconds passed, too many. The boy started to sob, slowly, painfully. Then, a cough. One, then another. The man on the floor jolted slightly. His chest rose, barely, then again, deeper. The medic gasped. So did the soldier. Layla's eyes opened, but she didn't smile. She just whispered one last word. Ruach. Breath. The man coughed again, this time louder. The boy's head snapped up. "Baba?" The man opened his eyes. Weak, but alive. Tears poured down the boy's face as he collapsed onto his father, sobbing into his shirt. The entire shelter held its breath. Then, applause, not loud, not explosive, but raw, like the sound of hope rediscovered. Miriam turned to Layla, eyes wide. "What was that?" Layla looked at her, eyes tired, but burning. "That," she said, "was not me." The room was still echoing with disbelief. Some wept quietly. Some stared in stunned silence. But no one doubted what they had seen. A man who was not breathing, who was pronounced gone, was now alive, breathing, weak but here, and beside him, a boy reborn in relief. Miriam watched the scene with her hand over her mouth, not because she didn't believe, but because she did, more than she ever had. She looked at Layla, the woman who had stepped into the fire, into the blood, into the silence, and called something back from heaven. And then, Miriam broke. Her knees hit the floor, hands covering her face. She cried, but not from fear, from everything. From grief long held in her chest, from the years of loss, from the guilt of silence, from the impossible beauty of what she had just witnessed. And she cried with the one person she never thought she would trust. Layla. Layla knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her back. At first, Miriam tensed, old instincts trying to surface, but then she leaned in. She let her head fall onto Layla's shoulder. Two women folded in the middle of a war zone, surrounded by the hum of survival, crying together, enemies by geography, sisters by pain, mothers by design. And now, united by something neither could explain, a woman nearby took a photo. Not out of disrespect. She captured a moment the world wouldn't believe without proof. Two mothers, one Israeli, one Iranian, weeping in each other's arms, while the breath of a miracle filled the room. That image would travel the world, but at that moment, neither woman knew. They were just two human hearts, finally allowed to break. And somehow, in that breaking, they were healing. Time moved strangely after that. No one checked watches anymore. No one asked what time it was. In the shelter, minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like eternity folded in silence. And in that silence, something sacred settled in. Miriam and Layla sat against the cold tunnel wall, side by side now. No longer strangers, no longer symbols of sides, just women, just mothers, just survivors. David had fallen asleep in his mother's lap, wrapped in the same scarf that once separated them. Layla stared ahead, not speaking, just breathing, just present. Miriam finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. He said, "I walked through the fire first." Layla looked at her slowly. "The lion?" Miriam nodded. "I used to believe," she said, "before I lost my husband, before the last war, before everything." She closed her eyes. "I prayed once on a night like this, begged God not to take him. He died the next morning, and I swore I'd never speak to him again." Layla didn't interrupt. "I thought I was done with faith," Miriam continued. "But now, I think faith wasn't done with me." Layla turned her head slightly. "You know what I learned after my husband died?" she said softly. "That sometimes faith lives best in the dark. not because it hides, but because it shines where nothing else can. Miriam looked at her. "That sounds beautiful," she said. "Did you read that somewhere?" Layla smiled. "No, I lived it." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of something stronger than answers, full of something deeper than explanations. Wisdom born from suffering, faith rekindled by fire, and in that dark place underground, beneath a world still shaking from war, a light was starting to rise, not from the ceiling, not from machines, from inside them. The generator hummed, lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, another blast rumbled. But inside that underground refuge, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was heavier, like the weight of something divine had entered unseen. A few children were curled up in their parents' arms. A medic slept sitting against a pillar, arms folded, his uniform still bloodstained. Even the soldier from earlier now sat alone, flipping through a small worn Bible from his pocket, reading slowly like the words were medicine. Then it happened. A sound. Not from above, not from outside, not man-made. It came like a wind, but without movement. A voice, but without language. A presence that made skin shiver and eyes rise without understanding why. David woke first. He sat up straight in Miriam's lap and whispered, "He's here." Miriam looked around. No one had spoken. No one was walking, but she felt it too. Layla closed her eyes slowly. She didn't need explanation. She'd felt it before. The voice of heaven. It didn't speak to ears. It spoke to bones, to breath, to soul. And though no word was heard, everyone in the room began to react, without knowing why. Some wept. Some lifted their heads. Some simply breathed deeper, as if oxygen had returned after a long absence. One woman stood up, arms raised, tears falling. Another knelt, whispering a prayer of surrender, and then, as if led by an invisible hand, the crowd began to sing, soft, broken, real, not in one language, not from rehearsed lyrics, but from the same spirit. A melody rose in the dark, a sound like mourning and victory, woven together. And in the middle of that sacred sound, Miriam looked at Layla, who was also singing, and realized this war didn't win. Not because the bombs had stopped, but because hearts had bowed, walls had fallen, and heaven was near. The singing faded slowly like a wave retreating from the shore. No one clapped. No one spoke. They just sat in the afterglow of something holy. A soldier at the far end of the tunnel received a radio call. He stood up, face tense, walked to the center of the shelter and announced, "We have confirmation. The west sector took a direct hit. Medical supplies didn't make it through. Anyone injured must wait until sunrise for possible extraction." The silence cracked. A wounded woman nearby moaned in pain. A man with a fractured leg gritted his teeth. The medic looked down at his empty kit and sighed. Miriam and Layla stood. "Someone has to go," the medic said. "To the next checkpoint. There might still be a box of supplies they missed. But it's dangerous." No one moved. David gripped his mother's hand. "Don't go." Layla looked at the medic. "How far?" 3 tunnels. 10 minutes if you run. But the last corridor's unstable. Could collapse again. Miriam didn't even realize she'd stepped forward. "I'll do it." The words came out before her brain could stop them. Her heart was louder. Layla grabbed her arm gently. "No," she said. "I'll go. You stay with your son." Miriam looked her in the eyes. "But what if you—" "I'm not afraid of fire," Layla said quietly. "Not anymore." David's eyes filled with tears. Miriam bent down and kissed his forehead. "She's not just going," she whispered. "She's called." Layla pulled her scarf tighter, nodded to the soldier, and disappeared into the darkness. The seconds crawled, then minutes, then whispers returned. Should she have gone alone? What if she doesn't make it? What if it's a trap? What if the roof falls? But Miriam sat still, hands folded, eyes closed, because for the first time, she trusted someone else with the fire. Layla's footsteps echoed in the hollow tunnels as she ran. She had no flashlight, just a small glow stick tied to her wrist and a growing pressure in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She wasn't afraid of dying. Not anymore. What she feared was not doing enough while she was still alive. The tunnel twisted left, then right. Rubble scattered the ground. Water dripped from cracked pipes. And the silence here was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was haunted. The air carried weight, memories, cries of those who hadn't made it through. Layla's mind raced as fast as her feet. She remembered the last time she held her own son. Before the checkpoint, before the soldiers split them, before she heard the gunfire. Is he still alive? Does he know I'm searching? Does he still remember my face? She pushed the thoughts aside. This mission was for Miriam now, for David, for the wounded. She reached a collapsed stairwell and squeezed through a narrow gap in the debris. Her scarf snagged on a piece of rebar. She yanked it free and kept going. Then, a sound? Not an explosion, not footsteps. A voice? Soft, faint, familiar. "Mama." Layla froze. Her breath caught. She turned around slowly. Nothing, just the echo of memory. "Mama," again. But it wasn't behind her. It was coming from her own heart, from the memory of her son's voice, from the ache she'd learned to carry like a scar beneath her ribs. She stumbled forward, hands scraped and bleeding, until, at last, she saw it. A wooden crate with a red cross tipped over in the corner of the tunnel, still sealed, still untouched. She fell to her knees, hands trembling. The label read, "Field Med Pack, Priority, Critical Trauma." Tears welled in her eyes, not because of the weight, because of the purpose. She lifted the crate into her arms, turned, and whispered to the silence, "For every child, for every mother, for everything they tried to burn but couldn't." And she ran, back into the dark, back toward the war, back toward the people waiting on a miracle. That she now carried in her hands. The shelter felt colder without her. Miriam sat with David tucked into her side, but her heart was somewhere else, out there, running through the tunnels with Layla. Minutes stretched like hours. The wounded groaned quietly. The medic paced. Everyone watched the tunnel entrance like it was a door to another world. She should be back by now. What if something happened? It was too risky. But Miriam said nothing. She just closed her eyes, whispering the only prayer she knew without words. Then, a sound. Not an explosion, not footsteps, helicopter blades. Far at first, then louder, closer, real. Someone screamed, "Look!" and pointed upward through a ceiling crack in the station. The flicker of a searchlight passed over it like a divine eye scanning the earth. UN markings. White cross. The soldier ran toward the emergency radio and shouted into it. Static. Then a voice responded. "We picked up a distress flare in your sector. Confirm location. Prepare for contact." People jumped to their feet. The medic began organizing the wounded. The boy whose father had survived the near-death moment clapped his hands together in disbelief. And Miriam, her hands to her mouth, whispered, "Layla!" Moments later, 2 aid workers dropped through a hatch with climbing ropes and flashlights. One of them shouted, "We found her!" Everyone turned. Layla, blood on her arms, dust in her hair. A crate in her hands. She stumbled in, breathless, eyes glassy but alive. As she reached the center of the room, she dropped to her knees and set the crate down. The label was now smeared in dirt but visible. Field Med Pack, Trauma, Respiratory, Emergency Fluids. The medic opened it with shaking hands. Saline, coagulants, adrenaline. He looked up, eyes wide. This will save lives. Layla looked at Miriam, and Miriam didn't say anything. She just walked forward and hugged her. Not with caution, not with gratitude, with love. At that exact moment, another voice crackled through the radio. "We've identified a safe corridor for extraction. Prepare to evacuate the wounded." The shelter erupted. Cheers, cries, hope, real hope. And above it all, 2 women stood together. One had risked everything to go. The other had trusted her to come back. And together, they had carried a miracle into a war zone. The helicopters landed with surgical precision. Two white beasts descending from the smoke-filled sky, blades slicing the air like swords of mercy. The roar shook the ground, but this time, it wasn't terror. It was relief. It was rescue. The wounded were lifted one by one, children first, then the elderly, then those who couldn't walk. The medics worked fast but gently. They had done this before, but even they looked stunned when they saw the condition of the people waiting inside. No chaos, no panic, just faith. Like the entire station had become a church built underground. Miriam stood at the edge of the platform, watching as David was helped into the helicopter by a smiling nurse. He looked back and waved. She smiled through her tears and mouthed, "I'm right behind you." Layla stepped beside her, brushing dust from her scarf. "You go too," she said. Miriam looked at her, surprised. "What about you?" Layla smiled softly. "I'm waiting for one more miracle." Miriam knew what she meant. Her son. A medic approached with a clipboard. "We have room for 2 more," he said. Layla nodded and gestured for Miriam to go, but Miriam shook her head. "She stays with me." The medic blinked. "There's another wave of helicopters coming, but no guarantee how long." Miriam looked at Layla. "You waited with me, in the dark. Now I wait with you, in the light." The first helicopter lifted off. Dust blew across their faces. Children clapped inside the shelter. And then, a voice crackled through the radio. "We've just recovered a civilian boy near Checkpoint 3. He was injured, no ID, keeps asking for his mother." Layla's legs buckled. The medic caught her. "What's his name?" she asked, barely breathing. Static. Then the response. "He says his name is Armin." Layla collapsed to her knees. Armin, her son, her only son, the one she thought lost, the one she hadn't seen since the border, alive, found, calling for her. Miriam dropped beside her, holding her hand. Layla's tears fell fast, uncontrolled, sacred. The medic clicked back on the radio. "We have his mother. Tell him she's waiting." For the first time in years, Layla wept with joy, and Miriam wept with her. They didn't wait long. 20 minutes later, the second helicopter arrived, dust whipping through the station like a cleansing wind. But this wasn't just another mission. This was destiny closing a circle. Inside the aircraft, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, was a boy no older than David. His lips were dry, one eye swollen. A scrape ran down the side of his face. But his eyes burned with life. When the nurse helped him off the chopper, he scanned the crowd, dazed, until his gaze landed on her. Layla, still kneeling, still weeping, still praying. She stood slowly as if her body couldn't fully believe her spirit was right. And then, he ran. Despite the pain, the injury, the weakness, he ran, straight into her arms. And the sound that came from her was not a cry. It was a release. A sound a mother only makes when a piece of her soul is returned. She held him tight, hands shaking against his back, rocking gently as if he were a baby again. "Armin," she whispered. "I found you." "No, Mama," he said, voice calm. "God found me." Everyone around them watched, some in tears, some in awe, some in silence. David walked up beside Miriam, holding her hand. He looked at Armin, then at his mother, and then said quietly, "He's the one I saw. When I was in the tunnel, the lion stood beside him." Miriam's eyes widened. "You mean, you saw him before?" David nodded. "Not like this." He was glowing. And the lion said, "He's not alone." Layla looked at Armin. He nodded slowly. "I saw him too," he whispered. Miriam asked softly, "Saw who?" Armin smiled, eyes glistening. He didn't say his name, but when he touched me, I wasn't scared anymore. Not of dying, not of the war, not of anything. He turned toward the others in the shelter. He told me, this war doesn't end with guns, it ends with people remembering who they are. Silence, but not empty. Holy. Everyone knew this wasn't just a rescue. This wasn't just survival. This was divine. They stood in silence, Layla holding Arman, Miriam with David beside her, 2 mothers, 2 sons, once strangers, now living proof of something greater than survival. The medic, the soldiers, the wounded, everyone paused. Because in that one moment, nothing else mattered. Not the borders, not the politics, not even the fear, just what was in front of them. Two women from opposite sides of a brutal conflict, with hands intertwined. Miriam reached for Layla's hand again. No hesitation this time. No tension, just warmth. Layla squeezed back, and as they stood there, hands joined, children safe, souls cracked open and burning with grace, a photographer lowered his camera. He didn't need to take another picture. The world wouldn't believe it anyway. You had to feel it to understand. Outside the shelter, helicopters circled. Another wave of evacuations was beginning. Soldiers shouted orders, medics rushed stretchers, but the tone had changed. People moved with purpose, with belief, with unity. Later, a soldier would say, "We had food, water, and medicine." But it wasn't that kept people alive. It was those two mothers. It was their hands. And when the photos were finally released to the world, two women holding hands, covered in dirt and blood but radiating peace, something cracked across the internet. Millions shared it. Millions cried, and millions said the same thing. If they can forgive, if they can love, maybe we can too. Because that day, two hands broke more than silence. They broke a war. The road was cracked. Ash still clung to the tires of the armored vehicle carrying them westward. But the air was different. Lighter, like it had been washed clean by the tears they'd left behind in the shelter. Miriam watched the terrain blur through the window. She held David's hand in hers. He slept. Finally. Peacefully. Beside them, Layla cradled Armin against her chest. He no longer trembled. They were crossing into the West Bank. Technically, it was still a zone of tension, maybe even more dangerous now, with the sudden surge of displaced families, patrols, and rumors of retaliation. But this wasn't a mission of war anymore. This was a pilgrimage, not to escape the conflict, but to deliver a message carried in human hearts, not paper scrolls. The UN escort leading their convoy radioed ahead. "We're approaching checkpoint 12. Civilian passage requested, 2 mothers, 2 minors, 1 medical crew." There was static. Then a pause. Checkpoint 12, cleared. They drove on. Dust rose behind the tires, but none of it stuck. As if even the land itself knew. These 4 were untouchable now. Layla turned to Miriam. "Do you think they'll believe us?" she asked, voice soft. Miriam looked ahead. "They don't have to," she said. "They'll feel it." And somewhere in the rubble of an old village they passed, a girl no older than 8 stood at the roadside, barefoot, holding a sign. The letters were shaky, but clear. "Love still lives." Both women saw it. Both wept. Neither said a word. The refugee camp looked nothing like they'd imagined. Not chaos, not despair, not lines of hopeless faces. Instead, music, drums, laughter, children playing with nothing but stones and imagination. As the vehicle rolled past the outer fence, people turned their heads. Word had spread fast. "They're here." The mothers, the boys who saw the light. Some had seen the photo. Others had only heard the whispers. But all of them, every single one, stopped to watch the moment they stepped out of the vehicle. Miriam first, then David, then Layla with Armin beside her. A sea of strangers made way like a tide pulling back for something holy. A woman in a red scarf stepped forward. Her name was Hannah. She was the camp's heart, part nurse, part leader, part saint. "You don't have to speak," she said. "We already know." But Layla shook her head. "We came to speak." That night they built a fire in the center of the camp. Not for warmth, not even for light, but for witnessing. And one by one voices rose. A father who lost 3 sons but forgave the sniper. A child who walked 4 days alone and still believed in angels. A nurse who whispered blessings over every dead body she buried. Then Layla stepped forward. She didn't cry. She didn't read from notes. She just told the story of the tunnel, of the radio, of the child who saw God. When she finished, no one applauded. They didn't have to. because something eternal had just been spoken into the air. Then David stood, just 8 years old, but with a voice that didn't shake. "I saw a lion," he said, "and it wasn't scary. It stood next to him." He pointed to Arman, "And the lion told me, some people are born to carry fire, some are born to carry peace, and some are born to carry both." The wind didn't blow, the flames didn't flicker, but everyone felt it. Like the lion was standing there, watching, waiting. And just like that, a camp of broken people became a choir of resurrection. The footage was never supposed to go viral. It was shaky, captured on a donated cell phone, no filters, no music, just a crackling fire and a boy's voice telling the world about a lion made of light. But within 12 hours, it was everywhere. At first, small accounts shared it. Then it hit a journalist's feed, then a former diplomat. Then a famous actress posted it with one caption, "This child just ended the war in my heart." By the next morning, the video had over 10 million views. People weren't just watching. They were weeping, donating, asking questions. And for the first time in months, news outlets couldn't ignore it. CNN, Al Jazeera, the BBC, everyone wanted to interview the mothers, but Miriam declined. So did Layla. "We didn't come to be famous. We came to remind people who they are." Still, the world watched. They saw two women, one Jewish, one Muslim, standing side by side. They saw children who should have been enemies become brothers. And something cracked, not just in politics, not just in headlines, in hearts. Letters poured in from a teacher in Chicago. "Your story made my class cry and then pray together." From a soldier in Ukraine. "You reminded me what I'm fighting for." From a child in Brazil. "I showed it to my mom. She hugged me and said sorry." One letter stood out. It came from a war reporter. He'd been in Gaza, Syria, Afghanistan. "I've seen tanks. I've seen death. But I've never seen anything more powerful than a child speaking peace without fear. Tell the boy, the lion walks with him." In that camp of dust and sorrow, Layla looked at Arman. Miriam looked at David. And for the first time in weeks, they smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had begun. The healing, the remembering, the awakening. It began with a hum, low, barely audible. Floating over the quiet of the camp like wind through leaves, nobody knew who started it. Some said it was the old man with the cracked violin. Others swore it was a girl singing in her sleep. But somehow, everyone joined. Hebrew, Arabic, English. 3 languages, 1 melody. Not a song they'd learned, not one they rehearsed. A song that rose from pain and turned into light. Miriam sang the words of Psalm 23. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Layla followed with the Shahada, whispered like breath, "There is no God but God." Then a young nurse added a gospel refrain she remembered from a radio back in Kentucky. "I am not alone. You go before me." Voices layered, cultures collided, but instead of clashing, they wove, like threads of one divine fabric. The same God, in many names, in one voice. Children with tear-streaked faces began clapping in rhythm. Mothers closed their eyes. Fathers dropped their weapons, not by command, but by conviction. Even the guards outside the gate stood still. Some cried, some crossed themselves, others fell to their knees. It wasn't a concert, it wasn't a protest, it wasn't even a prayer. It was something ancient awakening, a sound the world had forgotten, and now could not ignore. One drone flying above captured the moment. From above, it looked like nothing, just a few hundred people in the dirt around a fire. But zoom in, and you saw it. Hearts healing in harmony. That night, the camp was renamed. They didn't ask permission. They didn't need to. A child scratched it onto a wooden sign by the gate. Camp Hallelujah. No one changed it. No one ever would. At dawn, he was gone. No footprints, no sound, no warning. Just a folded blanket, a half-eaten fig, and David's voice echoing in memory. The lion walks with him. The camp searched frantically. Tents were turned upside down. Volunteers formed search parties. The hills were combed, but Armin had vanished. Layla collapsed to her knees. Her scream sliced the morning like thunder, but Miriam pulled her close. "He is not lost," she whispered. "He is called." Then, something strange happened. A girl with autism who hadn't spoken since losing her brother walked to the edge of the ridge and pointed. "The lion," she said softly. "He followed the lion." The crowd stilled, breath caught in every chest, eyes turned to the hills. And there, bathed in golden morning light, stood a boy, Arman, on the ridge, arms open wide, eyes glowing, not scared, not confused, just ready. And beside him, a shape, a figure made of light and shadow, flame and fur, a lion, too large to be real, too quiet to be wild, too holy to name. Miriam gasped. Layla covered her mouth. Everyone stared. And in that sacred moment, the lion bowed its head to the boy, then turned, walked into the mist, and Armin followed. No one stopped him. No one could. Because deep in their bones, they knew. He wasn't walking away. He was walking into something greater, into purpose, into calling, into legend. By nightfall, he was gone. But his name, his light, his lion, remained forever.